Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Erika Heald, and it's noon Pacific on a Monday, which means it's time for a content chat. And today, my guest is Mindy Zissman, and we're going to be talking about ghostwriting, which is something I do pretty much every single day. So hopefully you're either here because you want to hear more about how a ghostwriter can help your organization, or you're here because you're a ghostwriter and you want to chime on in. And either way, we look forward to hearing from you in the comments live or on the comments on the recap. Mindy, welcome to Content Chat.
Yay, thanks, Erica. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you.
Mindy Zissman for everybody. My business is called Zissman Media. We do ghostwriting for the risk and insurance world. So a lot of people think that's super boring. We think it's not. We love it. And I'll say that I really love it because I always do say this, that risk and insurance is really just a mirror to what's going on in the world. So we're constantly talking about what's going on in government, what's going on local, federal. We're constantly talking about what's going on in business, just really a mirror to what every different business, every market, every industry struggles with, and what their challenges are, their liabilities, their risks. And the goal of a lot of the content we create is just to reduce business risk.
I love that. And I had a tiny little dalliance in the insurance world. I was at United Behavioral Health for a year. So I do have a little bit of familiarity there. And definitely it was always really interesting stuff that we were working on from a content standpoint. So yeah. I can't wait to hear more.
Yay.
So let's just start by doing some level setting. I always like to start our content chat conversations, to help make sure everyone understands what we are talking about, because there are always differences in interpretations. So from your perspective, what does a ghostwriter do, and how is ghostwriting different from other types of content creation that you might otherwise be thinking of?
Okay, that's a great question. So I like to say we are the writers, and the expert or the executive that we write for, they're the authors. So if you think about it like that, there's the author's name is the name that's on the piece. Our name really never goes on the piece. That's what I tell people that we work with all the time, that we ghostwrite for. I want this to be perfect because my name is never going to live on here. Only your name is going to be. So I want it to be exactly your expertise. That's what I tell them before they get a chance to do some editing. But I would say that we differ from copywriters. We differ from book writers in just the way that we are actually taking the ideas of the executive or the expert that we're writing for, and we're pulling them out of their brain and getting them all out, on paper, using their voice, their tone, their ideas, obviously their expertise. That's the main goal. And then just creating it with better user experience than they might have. Very often we talk to experts and executives who just have a ton of knowledge in the space, but they just don't know how to do the writing. And we are able to get that information out of their brain. I mean, a big piece of it is the interview and the questions that are asked, and just the way that we're able to pull that information out. And then we put it, quote unquote, on paper in a way that sounds appropriate for the audience. So that's a great user experience. Readers want to get to the bottom of the piece that's been written. It's not the last time a lot of these executives have written something was like a term paper in college or a paper for law school. And that's not the goal of a blog. It's not the goal of an annual report. It's not the goal of a LinkedIn post. It's not the goal of a LinkedIn article. It's not the goal of a Forbes or Fast Company piece either. So our goal is to reach into their brain, get their ideas, their tone of voice, their stories, and then tell them in a way that's really digestible to the reader. So, and that differs from copywriting in that, you could have someone, we're working on a client's website right now, and a copywriter might just do some research online about the different products that they offer and create some cool copy that's, not necessarily tied to the business, but about that product. We're going to go in, we're going to interview the product manager for each of those pages, for each of those products, each of those services. We're going to talk to them. We're going to find out about their specific niche in the industry. Why this company? Why should people want to work with you or buy this product or use your service instead of the exact same one at their competitor? And then we're going to tailor the content for that audience specifically. So that's very different than, let's say, using ChatGPT, which I think I'm sure we're going to talk about at length here. Also, it's very different than just doing some SEO research online and being able to pull information off the web and come up with something catchy, which also we need to be able to do. We need to be able to write in the right way. But ghostwriting is really harnessing the information from the experts' brains and using that to get on paper instead of what's already out there in the internet.
For me, at least, since my background was magazine journalism, that's what I went to school to do.
Uh-huh.
It was so applicable to everything I do as a ghostwriter,
Right.
because it's all about your ability to be able to have those conversations with people, understand, where they're coming from, and really being able to capture their voice. Because you want to, at the end of the day, you want to create something that they don't just put their name on it, but they actually share it with their network saying, I wrote this thing. Because
Right.
even though you're the one who interviewed them and you structured it, they did write it because they're the ones who had the points, they shared their experiences, and it's, in their voice. And for me, that's the highest compliment, when you
Yeah,
have the person that you ghost wrote for sharing stuff on LinkedIn and they're totally amped about it.
exactly. That's why I always say they're the author, because it's all their ideas, right? They're
It
the
better
ones.
be.
It all goes back to them. Exactly. And I have to tell you something. Ghostwriting is one of the oldest professions, if you really think about it, right? How many books do we read from our politicians? Are some of our most famous people who have really great ideas? They're real thought leaders. They just don't have time to get their ideas out. They don't have the language because, like I said, if they would write something, it would still be like a law, a law professor paper,
Yeah.
or it's just not going to sound the same way. So we take care of the time element for them. We manage that. We still are able to capture their voice, and then kind of put it out into the masses. That's really the goal. But so many books that you read, you don't realize it might have like the big name of the author, like Hillary Clinton, and then under it says with so and so, and that with so and so, that's the ghostwriter, obviously.
And I think that's a really great, opening to talk about some of the misconceptions about ghostwriting. Because a lot of times people think, well, if it doesn't have that with line, then it wasn't ghostwritten. But I think you and I both know that a lot of folks don't do that. And we'll talk a little bit more about transparency later. But I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is people think that everything out there with someone's name on it was
Right.
100% created by them. But
Yeah.
frequently they're the author, but not necessarily the person that put together that content package.
Yes, and that's what when my daughter, who's now 22, when she was in eighth grade, their English teacher asked me to come and speak to the class, and I did, and they wanted to know what I did, and I brought a bunch of magazines that I was writing for, because like you, Erica, I started in trade publishing as well. Well, I started in daily journalism, but my first full time job, I would say, was working at a trade publishing company with 150 trade titles. But anyway, so I remember coming to speak to their class, and the girls kept saying to me, "Is this legal? Are you allowed to do this?" And so actually, when you asked me that question originally, I thought, oh, maybe that's the answer, is that this is legal. I think more and more people know today that it's normal and it's regular, and people assume most people don't write their own stuff. But years ago, I used to get on calls, and very often the first thing people would say to me was, I just want to say I'm so disappointed that my peers have not been writing their own stuff. I had no idea you've been working with them. So that was always fun, and I would laugh. But the truth is, to what we were saying before, it is their own stuff, right? It's their ideas, it's their tone of voice. And if we're doing our job well, we are capturing all of that for them. And we're just doing the time, project management, hard work of doing the actual writing. But it really, the goal is that it's always their ideas, and it always comes from them, and it's always their tone of voice, and it's always their expertise. And frankly, not every thought leader is a great writer either. So it may just be that they actually need help getting their ideas out. I talk to some thought leaders that are really, really tremendous at leadership and at exactly the niche that they serve and what they do. And I find in my notes that I write from my calls with them, I still have to go through. Some of them are a mess, and I have to pull this idea from over here and bring this idea over here, because they also don't talk in coherent sentences. They don't speak in outline.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a work on our end in terms of even the strategy of how to pull some of these ideas together and to create them in a way and give them over in a way that people can hear them and can follow them logically.
I think one of the other kind of related big misconceptions is people feel like, oh, you don't even necessarily need a real ghostwriter. You can just outsource creating bylines to an agency, and having, been on the receiving end in my brief stint in an agency of some of those kinds of requests where you never get to talk to that thought leader. And
Right.
instead, maybe you have a comms person or whoever your contact is saying, well, here's what they want to talk about. And it's inevitably some really boring, broad topic. And, it's like, well, I can create content on that and they can put their name on it. This isn't going to be thought leadership, and I'm not going to be ghostwriting, because to ghostwrite, you do have to have the input from that person.
Yeah.
So while, yes, the actual creation of the piece, you can outsource that, but you can't outsource the
The
relationship,
thinking.
the understanding, the thinking, and the conversation. You have to have that. So I think, ghostwriting is such a very important, relevant, and irreplaceable part of creating that really impactful thought leadership content.
I think that's true. And I've had that before. We've had executives that we've gotten on calls with, and there'll be a month where they say, we can't, she's not available this month, but can you still write something? And I'm always like, maybe. So I will say the ones that we know for years, we can absolutely come up with something, because we've had many strings that have, of ideas that have gone in multiple directions. And, I can always come up with something for someone who I've been working with for years, because I know how they think. That's the whole point of what we do. And I know what they might want to say, and I know how they might want to say it. But in a brand new relationship, it's very difficult for us to be able to pull something out of someone's head that we don't have access to their head. So, and I think I do believe it's true that not everybody's a thought leader. Not every expert, not every executive is a thought leader. Some of them prefer not to be a thought leader. They're just, going by the business and doing their, even if they're leaders, not every leader is a thought leader. So I think that, and that's actually one of my pieces of advice, I would say, for businesses trying to create thought leadership, is start slow and pick one or two leaders that are in fact thought leaders. Start with them, get their ideas out there. Someone who is a ready, willing, able participant, someone who has great ideas, someone who does have leading thoughts. It will be very difficult and very much uphill if you're starting with somebody and you're kind of pulling teeth. The other thing that I would say is you have to have buy-in from that expert or that executive as well. You absolutely have to be working with someone who's interested. So when we start working with a business to write executive thought leadership, let's just say, for example, I always recommend starting with the low-hanging fruit. Who's the guy or gal with the biggest personality that has, maybe, is a part of an industry or a market segment that you do want to feature. It may not be your top guy that you think, because that person may or may not be able to make time for you on their calendar. They might not set aside the time to meet and spend time with the writer. But as you were saying before, Erika, also the beginning of that it's really a relationship, right? Like, we create these relationships with the executives and the leaders that we seek to work with. And it goes both ways. So just like hiring anybody in your business, the beginning of that relationship always takes more time from both sides. And then again, at the end, or not even at the end, but even a few months in, you see the fruits of that labor, where we're able to create things that really are in line with their brain. And we're able to, to help them really get their word out in a super effective way. But the beginning is always a little bit of hand-holding on both ends, where everybody has to come together to really get to know each other, allow us our time. That's back and forth of me asking questions, them answering, us coming up with something. It's very hard to access someone's brain without them lending it to you.
So true. That's why, primarily my ghostwriting is part of my fractional content leader services. So I usually have a couple of clients that I have long-term retainers with, and those are the executives that I end up doing the ghostwriting for, because I'm in meetings with them. I'm in strategy sessions. I get to know them. I spend time with them. So it's a lot easier to then channel my inner thought leader, because I'm channeling them because I can hear their voice in my head, quite literally. But that said, sometimes you do get approached by people who are like, hey, we had an opportunity to do an article for Fast Company. Can you ghostwrite this? Or things like that. So I'd love your perspective on, is it possible for folks to do that kind of one-off, one-time ghostwriting engagement? Or is there a better time that they should wait to actually make the investment in a ghostwriter? Like, what is the best practice from your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you'll see the most success with someone who is ready, willing, and able and interested in seeing it be successful. And that's why I always recommend starting with one or two people that are committed to the goal. And when you do that, and I've seen this time and time again with nearly every single one of our clients, when we do it like that, we find success in these few leaders and few executives working with them. And then they have success, and everybody on their team sees their success. And then those other executives or experts come out of the woodwork and they say things like, wait a minute, how do I do what Bob's doing? Like, how can I get to do what Sally has been able to do with her team? So that's a much better position for a marketing team to be in, where their executives and their thought leaders are coming to them and asking for this kind of, privilege to be able to work, with the ghostwriter and be able to get their stuff out. And that only happens when you've already proven it with the first ready, willing, and able contributors. So I think that's really like one of my best tips. And I see it work time and time again with clients. And then the other reason is because then nobody's taking on too much. Everybody understands the commitment that it takes for the executive, for the ghostwriter, for the marketing team to be able to create real good thought leadership and get it out there. But I find those teams that start slow and work up do it so successfully. There's really so many opportunities. And there's a lot of ways to distribute your thought leadership, right? Like the interviewing and the writing is just one piece of it. A huge piece of it is distribution. And that could look like anything. Some of the things you were saying before, Erika, like Forbes and Fast Company, you could be a thought leader for those organizations. Those companies, for example, do have boards. Forbes does it actually by discipline. So they have like a finance board. They have a CFO board. They have a human resources board. They have a marketing board, etc. And sometimes they will put out questions and ask the executives questions that will be put into articles that the Forbes company writes, by different writers of theirs, or you can be the author as well. Those are like pay to play opportunities. LinkedIn has a ton of opportunities to create a newsletter, to write articles, of course, create posts, your own business email newsletter that goes out, whether that goes to, internally to your teammates or externally to your potential prospects, current customers, etc. And then Erika, where you and I both started, right? In trade publishing. So magazines, anything in the trades, the industry magazines, those are a phenomenal place to exercise your thought leadership and really get your name out and your business's name out. And always do it. Here's another piece of advice, but always do it. Always be giving, right? Be giving advice, be teaching, provide opportunities for the people in your target market to learn from you, obviously instead of selling.
And that to me is really the difference between doing, content and doing content marketing. Because, you can make content that's about your product or about the company, but content marketing is about giving. It's about giving people, a new point of view, something to help them do their jobs or live better, or even just, sparking inspiration or sparking new ideas. And I think that ghostwriters are really well equipped to help those SMEs, those thought leaders, and those, to figure out how they can do all of that. So that way they're not just focusing on the corporate messaging points, because nobody wants to hear those in these kinds of other content videos.
So and that's the essence of thought leadership, I think, is being able to give your advice and being able to provide that kind of information before somebody buys from you. And in today's world, we've all heard the statistics. You have to read something 3 to 5 times before somebody even reaches out to a sales team or someone internally to your business. And where are they getting that information? They're either reading articles that you've authored as executives and experts. They're reading white papers, ebooks, blogs that business has put out and authored, maybe with your name or, an expert's name. They're reading stuff in trade publishing, trade magazines. They're reading stuff on LinkedIn. Everybody is doing their research before they reach out to your sales team. It used to be a salesperson was the first person to touch a customer. And that's just that, even if that's the first live person to touch a customer, it's certainly not the first, article to touch the customer. People are reading and learning all about our companies behind their backs, right? Everything happens when you're not in the room. That's really what's happening. The sales conversations are happening without our sales teams today. So the more thought leadership that you can put out, like Erika said, helping people, teaching, with your executives as being at the helm, with them being the people who are leading the conversation and leading by example, that it even does wonders. Thought leadership, one of the bonuses I've seen of thought leadership has been actually recruiting and retaining internal people. So that's something we never really intended to set out to do with thought leadership. And it's been a bonus that's kind of come with the thought leadership boat, is that when you put the stuff out for your external people, your potential clients, your current clients, your partners, the internal people read that too. And they see, wow, this is really what our company's about. This is really what this executive believes.
It's really bringing the brand values to life, because
yes, exactly.
ideally that's, that should always be part of the goal.
Right.
That said, sometimes we're brought in as ghostwriters because there's an executive who's thinking, hey, I want to be more active on social, or I have, I want to be doing the conference circuit, giving presentations. So sometimes we can be brought in by that executive who needs the assistance, and then slowly but surely introduced to the rest of the team.
Yes.
But other times we get hired and brought in by the comms team or by the content marketing team, because they recognize that they, have these folks who have all this great information, but they don't necessarily have the content creation skills, or they just don't have the bandwidth to take it on. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, when you do have the intro to that content marketing team, or you are brought in with them, by them, what are some of the ways that you can work with them and that they can really help you as a ghostwriter have that consistency and authentic to the brand kind of content creation for your author?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I would definitely, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of a delay here.
I think there have been some internet issues related to trading stuff, so I think it's affecting everyone's internet.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I can still hear you. That's the good news. Even if we're all in slow-mo. I would say definitely, like we talked about before, that one-on-one conversations and partnership between the ghostwriter and the executive team, of course. I do think that managing expectations is really a major piece of it. And that onus really belongs to the marketing team, that they can prepare that executive, prepare their own team for what the commitment of both their executive and the ghostwriter will be, so that everybody's really on the same page. And I think that's a huge piece. It's one of the reasons I like working with teams who we've been successful with before, over and over, because I know that those things are already in place, and that's already going to be working. But once everybody has managed expectations, it works. I had one client previously who definitely, his marketing team did not do a great job working with him as the business owner and operator, and they weren't able to really prepare him for what the work with me would constitute. And so what happened was, the partnership just really sizzled out over time, because he didn't understand what I was expected to do. And he didn't understand that he would have to put in some time, speak to me. He wanted to just show me a style of writing that he likes. And he knows I knew the industry, and he wanted me to just be able to go with it. I don't even know actually if he had leading thoughts or not. He had a great, phenomenal startup in the insurance space, but it was unclear if he even had really amazing thoughts, because he wanted me to be his thought leader instead of his ghostwriter. So that does happen. And I think understanding the process and managing the expectations is critical for everybody, but certainly the marketing team, that's definitely their job.
Definitely. And I'd say, to add to that, the content team in particular, they have the opportunity to make sure that you as the ghostwriter can get that kind of like executive summary level of what the marketing team is working on. Like, do they have, proprietary data or research that, you should make sure to include, because your thought leader might not even think to say it to you, or worse yet, they might quote some of those statistics and not tell you that it's their own data. And that's like the best stuff to include when you're writing for them, because of course, then you can also include that link back to their own content, which is the holy grail. Because
Right.
some of the publications won't allow it, but on the flip side, I know that with Fast Company, for example, I've gotten them to include a number of links because it was to some really good owned content that was about research. Because if it is proprietary data, proprietary research, and you haven't hidden it behind a form, you can get those links.
Right. Yeah, that's really great. That's a really great point. I love that. I think that you have to understand the lay of the land and which businesses, organizations, and publications you're partnering with. Absolutely. That's a great point.
So earlier in our conversation, we did touch on lightly the transparency issue, and specifically, is it legal? Is it, is it authentic? Is it
Are you allowed
ethical?
to do that?
Can we do that? So I'd like to talk a little bit about the kind of, transparency and how that's especially changing in light of AI. I wrote a little bit about that in my newsletter today,
Mm-hmm.
because it's one of those issues that you do really have to think about when you are a ghostwriter, especially when you have a specific niche, you have a specific area of expertise. You do have to be very careful about ensuring that you're not injecting too much of your own content or your own experience into what you're creating, because AI and all of these other tools, they're building a profile of everyone, and they're going to start saying, hey, these ideas belong to Mindy, even if I was the ghostwriter, for example. And you can end up in a kind of a sticky situation where you can look like you're plagiarizing this person you ghost wrote for, because you did have some of those experiences that you included as examples, or etc. So I feel like this issue is really kind of coming to the forefront now, and even changing from how it was before, where, yeah, if it was a big book by somebody famous, they probably had a with, but all this other content, it regularly goes out with just the author's name.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know how this is all going to play out. And obviously, like everything with AI, we've all been saying, okay, let's see what happens. I do believe, though, that those businesses that are creating thought leadership will stand out in this world of content created by AI. I think that number one, original ideas and original writing is what is going to kind of come to the top in the, water and oil in the cup. I do believe that because I think that AI sounds very similar over and over, using the same words. As you just said, Erika, obviously it's pulling from the same database of information on the internet. And I think the businesses and the executives and the real thought leaders that do want to stand out will be creating their own personal content. And that content, whether or not you start using it with AI, you created an outline in AI, there's a lot of ways to use AI that aren't exactly content creation. I certainly wouldn't use it to do any research. That is definitely where a lot of the hallucinations come in. If you're looking for a specific stat, they won't be able to give you the link to where that stat comes from. I know Erika in your newsletter today said something about having a journalism background, like I do as well. So that definitely irks us journalists, right? We want the original sources for everything, and we want the ability to, really use those statistics in the right way. And so that's one piece. But I think in general, anything that real thought leaders are creating with their real opinion is going to be new and different and will stand out from the crowd, and certainly, rise above the fold with a lot of content being created by AI. So I think ghostwriting is, like I said, it's one of the oldest writing professions that we've ever had. But I also think it will stand the test of time as well, because I think it creates really brand new original content every single time. And I think that's going to be the challenge for marketing teams that have little budget, to be able to figure out how to leverage AI, but not use it 100% for content creation. I think there's other ways to use it even better to be able to, whether it's certain types of research, not statistics, but, let's say internet research of what are my competitors talking about.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great way to use AI. Let AI, search the web, pull the information that you need, so you don't have to put somebody on that project for days on end of, doing that type of research. But statistics, I don't think so, and definitely original thoughts. They're not even trying to be original.
Totally. I think one of the other ethical considerations that we as ghostwriters run into is inevitably when you're talking with a potential client, they'll say, "Oh, well, I'd love to see some examples of your ghostwriting." And I always look at them and I say, "Of course not. No, absolutely not." And sometimes they're a little taken aback. But the thing is if somebody hasn't included me as a contributor or as a with on that byline, I absolutely will not ever share that, hey, this specific post was something that I ghost wrote for someone. I will sometimes, give the, information of, well, so-and-so is my client and I did ghostwriting for them. Because that to me isn't crossing the ethical boundary as long as I know that they are someone that would be fine with it, which isn't all of my clients. Some of them would not be okay with me saying, yeah, I did ghostwriting for them. Some of them, in fact, would probably be really mad. So I'd love to hear kind of some of your thoughts about that too, because, whether or not things are illegal, sometimes it's up in the air about what the standards are.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have very few clients, like I can count less than one hand of fingers, who have ever said, we don't want you to publicly share that we work with you. That being said, I'm not out there on LinkedIn talking and naming specific clients unless they're okay with it. I do share, though, the content that we've created for businesses if they're okay with it. I do put it on our website. I actually even assume that they're okay with it. Unless they say otherwise. I've had very few, like I said, very few clients tell me at the outset of an engagement, hey, we want to work with you, but we don't want it to be clear that we work with you. Most businesses I find are okay with it. Obviously, I'm not out there publishing the pieces that we work with, like on LinkedIn or something like that. But I do have a whole portfolio on my website, and people can go there and see a lot of the work we've done. Again, like I said, not everything, because there are some clients who aren't interested. But I have people come to me all the time and say, well, if you work with a lot of our competitors, because like I said, I work in this risk and insurance space. So even though it actually sounds more narrow than it is, it's a very, very huge industry. But I will have people come and say, every once in a while, I have a client who is considering hiring me. And one of the last questions they ask is, well, if you work with my competitors, how can I trust you to work with me? And my answer always is, besides obviously, signing something that says that, anything I learn and work with you about will stay, with your company. That's obviously an important, thing to do. But besides that, one of my responses is always, well, if I didn't work with your competitors, I wouldn't be so valuable to you. Right? That because I work in this industry over and over and over, I know the industry well. And one issue of that is the obvious, right? It's the topics, the things that we're talking about, the issues that are happening, the challenges in the industry, so that we know what to write about. We get on calls with people and they don't want to have to explain what D&O insurance is, or what reps and warranties is, or what the difference between this policy and this exclusion is. So those are reasons. Obviously, they'd want to work with us, but also we know what's going on in the industry. We know what's happening. We know what people are doing and what they aren't doing. And we can help you build out your own niche and your own piece of the marketplace, even if you feel like it's crowded in one specific aspect. So I think that it's important to be able to share those pieces of content when we can. Obviously, we can't always do that, but we do share more of that. I think it sounds like, but anyway, yeah, I think it's a really important distinction to understand your niche and to be able to write in it, and to be able to, sometimes that means writing for multiple competitors like we do. So it's definitely walking a fine line, that's for sure.
And it's funny too when people say, oh, but you work for my competitor. It's like, are you exactly the same as that other person? Do you have the exact same, perspectives and, experiences? No, of course not. So it's no different than, why would a magazine interview all of you? for,
Right.
the
That's
same
actually
topic.
such a great point. I love that point, Erica. And I think that's so true. And I often find that even to, let's just say, like in commercial insurance brokers in the small to medium sized business space, I have multiple clients in that space, and they all have even different pieces of that niche. So, some of them might work in certain industries. Some of them might do a little bit larger, some of them might do a little bit smaller, whatever it is. I find that they all attack it from a different perspective. They have different experts at their helm and within the business that they want to put forward and shine through. And they really do have a different perspective of each niche. So even working with competitors, the biggest crossover I find is just on topics, but less on what we do with those topics, how we approach it, and then what their exact clientele is. That's such a great point.
And that's exactly why you work with a ghostwriter who can help you find that new way to talk about that tried and true topic.
Right.
Um,
Exactly. Exactly.
so
Because AI is just going to repeat, exactly the way everybody else did it online. That's for sure.
exactly. Well, once an organization realizes that they're, interested in and ready to work with a ghostwriter, how do they actually find the right person or organization, to partner with, for this work? Because, your name isn't on all the stuff that you ghostwrite.
Right.
So on earth can they find ghostwriters that are either, specialize in their industry, or, have an expertise in a specific type of content creation? What are your tips for how they can actually find the person that's going to be the right ghostwriter for their expert?
Oh, that's a great question. So I would say a couple of different things. Number one, most of the things I hear from people that I work with is that they asked peers of theirs in their particular industry. So word of mouth, right? Reach out to people that you've met at conferences, that in your industry, even at a competitor of yours, that you're friendly, you have friendly competition across the aisle. So a lot of times word of mouth is great. Another thing I would recommend is at the trade shows that you go to, at the industry shows, talk to people, network, see what they're doing, find people like that. I go to a lot of the insurance shows, I go to the insurance marketer shows, and I'm at all of those places too. So I'm speaking, I'm there, talking, connecting with people. So I think that's huge. Obviously, people have found me on LinkedIn as well. I would say about 30% of our business comes directly from LinkedIn. So those are people who either I reached out to in a direct message because I said that they were in our target market, or they reached out to me. So that also happens. I mean, the LinkedIn platform, if you think about it, and Eric, I don't know how old you are. I'm gonna be bold here. I just turned 46 a few weeks ago. So I am of the age that for sure we were going to trade shows for years and years and years. And that's where so much of the sales was happening. So much meet and greet, so much networking was happening there. And then all of a sudden when it came to COVID, boom, right? It all went
Yep.
online and everything had to be digital. So LinkedIn has been just a tremendous way to kind of do that shoulder tap, I would say, just like if you were at a conference and really connect with somebody. So searching for people on LinkedIn, definitely word of mouth, any industry conferences and shows that you're going to. Those are all really great ways. If you like something that someone did right, you can always reach out to them. A lot of my clients will say, oh yeah, I work with Mindy, here's her information. And my business has grown obviously from LinkedIn, like I mentioned, but even more so word of mouth from clients referring me to other clients who have said, hey, you're putting out some really great content. I'd like to do that. How are you doing that? How are you creating so much in such a little time? Or I know you have limited resources. How are you doing this? And then obviously the clients will, refer them to us, and our business has really grown significantly that way. So, and all of the above. Do you have other ideas, Eric? I'd love to hear what yours are.
I 100% agree that the word of mouth and asking your network is the smartest way to start, because then you're not just getting, random names. You're getting people that folks that you've worked with and that you're compatible working with, giving you referrals to people that they've worked with. And the reason I mention that is we all have very different working styles, and you can end up in that situation where somebody might be a really great ghostwriter, but they're not going to be a good fit for you and your style. because they just, either don't have that expertise or they just have a different approach. So I feel like someone who knows you is going to give you a much more, nuanced kind of introduction, warm referral. And that's going to make a difference to the ghostwriter too. Because if it's somebody that you loved working with saying, hey, this is my colleague and they're looking for somebody, then you're already excited about it. So I think that is actually super important. Like you, I speak at a lot of conferences and events. And I think that, looking at those agendas and seeing who is out there talking and creating content about the topics that your thought leaders want to be known for, that's a fantastic way to see if you don't have anybody in your network who can make you that referral. Those folks may or may not be ghostwriters, but I guarantee they're going to know who the people are in their industry that are ghostwriting. Because if they're not doing it themselves, then maybe they're working with somebody who's doing ghostwriting for them. So you're going to be able to get those kinds of referrals and connections. Because to your earlier point, there's enough work out there for all of us.
Absolutely.
I specialize in technology primarily. I work with a lot of enterprise technology startups and with, more enterprise level technology as well in like HR tech. But I also occasionally do things in membership associations because that was, one of my first jobs was running content and comms for an association. So, we have our specific niches, and I love referring out, to other people. If someone comes in and they say, hey, I'm in manufacturing, I'm like, that's fantastic and not my niche. Let me introduce you to somebody, because to me, that's just so much more valuable for both of us because you want them to have a great experience. And I think, having those conversations up front and trying to find people who are going to be not just looking, there are people who always say, oh, I can interview anybody and write anything about anything. And I appreciate the positive attitude there. But I think when you're talking about ghostwriting, to make the best use of time, you really do need to find someone in your niche who understands where your person's coming from if you really want to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think just to pick up on, to highlight something that you said, if you think about yourself as a marketer, having kind of two paths to find those people, whether, whatever kind of vendor they are. One path would be your industry. So let's say for me, it might be like risk and insurance. For you, Erika, it might be, SaaS or, any type of software or, any type of tech. But then also, if you think of yourself as a marketer, there's marketing channels. So if you're also going to marketing conferences and you're meeting other marketers, they might have other resources for you as well. So definitely industry, but also market. And I think that there are tons of opportunities to network. And especially today, like this post-COVID world, so many people are getting back to the conferences. All the conferences I went to this year were at least back to their pre-COVID numbers, if not stronger. And so I think that these opportunities to really be one-on-one and face-to-face, which even though it kind of feels like a misnomer because we are face-to-face all day, right? We're all on Zoom calls, team calls. But I have found in the last year or two by going to conferences again, that there is nothing to replace that face-to-face connection, even a Zoom call. When I see these people live, I know what they look like, right? I've been looking at them in the face, weekly for a year or monthly, something like that. But
it's so really different to be in person.
Yes, exactly. It's really not the same. So that's been, I think, a great boon to networking, has been the ability to come back together in the recent past, like the last year or two.
Well, in a perfect world, we would always be finding those best fit clients. But in the interest of helping other people learn from our experiences, I would love it if you could share some of the common pitfalls that you've seen, either with your peers' clients, with your clients, et cetera, about working with ghostwriters. Like, what are some of the things that can kind of cause that what could be or should be a really fruitful collaboration to kind of go off the rails?
Oh, that's I love this question. A lot of things. Some of them we've already talked about. I would say one of them that we haven't talked about that happens all the time. And Erika, I promise you're going to relate to this and be shaking your head. The million cooks in the kitchen after the article has been drafted. That is always one of the biggest pitfalls. We recently did 4 or 5 reports. I would say this calendar year, maybe we've done even 6, but we've done a number of reports this year. Many of them were for one specific client, others were for others, and you can really see the culture at different places. One of the reports we did had to have more than 20 people sign off on it. Now, we all know that when you get more than 20 people in a room on any topic, whether you're all the experts in it or you're not, it's pretty much a disaster, right? Sometimes we even have 2 people and 3 opinions. So I think that is one of the biggest pitfalls. And I see marketers, really, it's the hardest for the in-house marketers. I don't mind. I'm happy to get a list of edits and make all the corrections. And then after, obviously, we have to go back through, because once you've had a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and everybody put in their track changes, the A's and the commas and the periods certainly are not going to be aligned. But really, it's the hardest on the internal marketers who have multiple clients within their own business. I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls. And it's a very hard thing to come at and to figure out how to streamline. But usually when you can kind of take the top person in each vertical market or however your business is organized and make them the subject matter experts who need a sign off, that is a lot better than a ton of people downstream. Even if you only interviewed those people downstream, to be able to bring it up to the higher ups and let them kind of unilaterally sign off on it, whether it's specific sections of a report, or you're just dealing with one blog and you just have one author, that's a lot easier, obviously. But I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls. It's one of the biggest ways that I see marketers just really pulling out their hair, internal marketers. And there's only so much I can do externally. And not everybody, sometimes people they have their QA/QC process and that's it. And it's written in stone and there's nothing to do to change it. But if you can, and I've definitely seen some lessons learned from some clients we've worked with over and over. Usually after the first report, they kind of take a much more no nonsense approach. And before we even do the interviews, they've scheduled who is approving this and who do we not need their approval. So I think that's something that's one of the main pitfalls I see.
I would definitely agree with that. And, you can really run into this in organizations that ironically are the ones that have the best governance and documentation in place, because they'll have their style guide, which has their defined brand voice. They'll have the messaging documents. They'll have all of this really great stuff if you're a content creator. But the problem is they'll frequently have the expectation that you will, be applying all of that to the thought leadership content. And the problem with that, of course, is that under zero circumstances should the person, the thought leader, the expert, their brand voice, it should be complementary to the company's brand voice, but they're not going to use the exact same turns of phrase. They're not going to have the exact same voice because that would be inappropriate. And it wouldn't serve the objectives for creating thought leadership.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's funny when you talk about the style guides, we work with companies who, like you said, have very specific style guides. I mean, we have a client who you can't even use the word best practices. So we have some real specific. And then some clients who you walk in and there's no style guide, there's no brand voice. And as the ghostwriter and working together with the marketing team, you're together kind of like trying to assemble the plane while landing it. And sometimes that works because it's fun and it gives you a little more agency and the ability to kind of create the voice with them. But sometimes it's also really nice to have those rules and guideposts so that you can create, thought leadership within that envelope in the right way. But yeah, we've worked with every different type of client. We work with thought leaders that are real thought leaders. We work with thought leaders that aren't such great thought leaders. The whole gamut, and everybody deserves to have the ability to get their voice and tone out there to their prospects and customers. But yes, there's a lot of challenges along the way, that's for sure.
And basically, I think it just comes back down to, as you noted before, the relationship, building that relationship, which is why it's so much better if you have an ongoing relationship with the ghostwriter, so that way they can learn the ways in which that the author's voice and opinions and style is different from the company's style. So that way it just speeds everything up and it's a lot more positive outcome for them too. Because if you make it pleasant and easy for them, and they know that they're going to get a first draft back from you that is very close to where they want it to be, that person is going to be so much more enthusiastic about and more bought into the entire idea of doing thought leadership content, versus if they get somebody who interviews them and then comes up with something completely off base that doesn't sound like them, then they're going to not want to do it ever again.
Right. Right. That's absolutely true. Wow. That's so true. It's such a great point. And that goes to that managing expectations conversation that we had before as well, right? That, part of that, the onus is on the marketing team. Part of it's on you coming in as the firm or the ghostwriter that's coming in and having those conversations and kind of warning everybody and letting them know that, hey, here's what's going to happen. Here's how this process works. And, the other thing that I'll just say, and this is probably not so, I don't know if this is popular or not, but I've come to see this with many, many clients. And it even speaks to that other pitfall of, having a million cooks in the kitchen on the back end of the approval process. But I think there's also something to keep in mind that about not making, perfect the enemy of good. Yes. And I'm not saying that every piece that you should put out should be a B+. I think everything should be an A. But if you have situations like too many people in the approval process, or an executive that's not really forthcoming with real deep thoughts, or, a marketing team that is very small, or, there are so many reasons why putting out content that's really solid and very good is just the best idea at the moment, rather than working so hard to create something that's perfect and missing things like, optimal distribution, ability to repurpose, how to, put something out there and get it on all the different channels that you're on. So I think sometimes when we strive, I think the goal should always be to strive for perfection and to, take something that's good or above. But I also think that it's very easy to lose sight of the goal when we're creating content. And I've seen it happen a lot of times.
And the biggest casualty in those situations is the timeliness, because the topic that was amazing to talk about when, you had the idea or when you had the initial conversation, if it takes 2 months to get something approved, if it was a really timely topic in your industry, chances are somebody else already got out there with that same perspective that you want to share months ago, and you're going to look like
your competitors. And don't worry, it's one of your competitors, right?
Exactly. So I do agree. It's so important to just get it done, to push publish, to get things out there and to keep going, because it's not, it's not ever a one and done when you're actually trying to cultivate a thought leadership platform. It is an everyday task. So the good news is that means that there's plenty for us to do as ghostwriters.
Exactly. And, the way that you were talking about it before, Erika, that it's a relationship, we said, between, let's say, the ghostwriter and the author. But it's also the goal of content is to create a relationship between you, the business, and obviously the executive, who's a representative here as the author, and the client, right? Yeah. The current client, the prospect. The goal is to create a relationship always. That's what thought leadership does. That's what real, true content does. Every time you teach, you provide a different perspective. You engage your audience in learning about the industry and giving them some information that they didn't know before that they needed. We call that consulting, but it's really deep down at its essence in creating trust, creating a partnership between you and the customer, the prospect. And that is the ultimate goal of thought leadership, is to cultivate trust and cultivate an understanding between the two of you. And that is what your content should be doing. So in the effort to get it out there and to create that relationship and to build trust, it doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to be really good.
Totally. I couldn't have said it better myself. Mindy, we're at the end of our hour. So thank you so much for being our guest. But for people who are watching this on the archive or who are watching live, where can they find more from you? Either to, of course, to hire you, but just, hear more from you about ghostwriting as well.
Sure. Definitely on LinkedIn. Reach out. I'd love to connect with you. Mindy Zissman. My name is spelled with an I, so if you can't find me, but hopefully even if you enter with a Y, you'll still find me. My business is called Zissman Media. You can reach to me there. You can jump on my calendar from a link on my website. That is pretty obvious. You won't miss it. I think it's an orange button. You can jump on my calendar there, but definitely just even reaching out and on LinkedIn is great.
Thank you so much, Mindy. And thanks to everybody watching. We'll see you again next week for Content Chat. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Erika.